Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. On this episode, we have a very special guest, James Traub. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me, Rich.
Absolutely, James. For those of us that don't know anything about you or how you help people, can you please share a little bit about yourself and what you do, please?
Absolutely. So I'm a certified divorce coach, and I oftentimes joke that no one grows up thinking that they're going to be a divorce coach when they're older. So I, like many of my colleagues, have my own story about how I got to this point. But, in a nutshell, as a divorce coach, I help people who are either thinking about divorce or actually experiencing divorce to figure out how they want to navigate that journey and ideally do it in the most amicable way possible. And this is super important for people who have children. And there's an important need for them to maintain a relationship in the future. So often divorce ends up destroying, relationships. And what comes out on the other side is just a lot of challenge for those two parents in their relationship with their kids. So a divorce coach is a complement to legal and financial support that helps people to navigate all of the emotional and the relational stuff that happens, on this particular journey. And just recently, this last month, I also got trained as a mediator, and that's a nice complementary skill set to divorce coaching. We can talk about mediation a little bit later too, but it's a process that can be used to help people stay in the driver's seat of what actually happens during their divorce rather than letting it kind of get carried away with attorneys or a judge in a courtroom.
Wow, James, so many threads to pull on, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. But before I get to the questions, I like to ask, are you kind of focusing in one area, like one state, like a lot of therapists, they kind of are limited to the state that they're licensed in, or can you kind of help beyond one state? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a divorce coach, there's no licensure requirements. So I work with individuals in all 50 states. I'm actually partnered up with hellodivorce.com as one of 3 divorce coaches that supports clients using their platform. And so that brings in a lot of business from California up to New York and down to Florida. As a mediator, it's not a requirement, but my choice is to just work with individuals and couples within the state of North Carolina. There are differences about how mediation is conducted and what mediators are allowed to do state by state. And so, yeah, my focus there is only people in North Carolina and primarily in the Charlotte area.
Got it. That makes sense, James. I know you mentioned earlier your journey into getting into this line of work. Can you kind of shed a little bit more light into what kind of motivated you to get started?
Absolutely. So if we go back to 2021, just briefly, I was going through a real midlife crunch. I got let go and left corporate work, decided I didn't want to go back, and spent a lot of time doing things like yoga, did a bunch of therapy, started getting involved in men's work. And as I started to learn a lot more about myself and where I was lacking some skills and some awareness around relationships, especially, I dug in to really kind of understand, what had happened with some work relationships, what had happened with some personal relationships over time, and got more and more involved in men's work. And I started to notice a trend that a lot of men that were showing up to either men's groups, men's circles, men's retreats were showing up because they had just come through a tough breakup or potentially even a divorce. So, for a while, I'd been wanting to help men in the areas of emotional intelligence and intimacy and how to deepen their relationships. But unfortunately, many men don't really stop and slow down and take action until something breaks. And so for many men, it's either a bad breakup or a divorce that is that breaking moment where they say, okay, I really need to look at things now. And so I very naively, after a men's retreat, came back and I Googled Charlotte, North Carolina, men divorce coaching, just wanting to know if anyone was focused on the needs of men, post breakup. And I discovered that you could become a certified divorce coach at that time, and eagerly, went through that training. And as I've come out on the other side of that, most people know that most people have a pretty negative experience with divorce. My background, prior to all of this work is in quality assurance and quality control. So my mind has always been around how do you consistently create good outcomes? And as I learned a lot about divorce, I saw a process that was consistently delivering poor outcomes. And so I've gotten really excited to understand, what are the things that are happening for people that lead divorce to be so exhausting, so conflict ridden, so costly, and so damaged, coming out on the backside. And so there's been a fusion now between a desire to help people to preserve relationships, which I still have. Not everyone I work with ultimately moves in the direction of divorce. But if people do move through divorce, to do it as amicably as possible with as little conflict and stress and strain, as possible.
Wow. Yeah, that is amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing about the quality control, quality assurance component, because I do believe that, at that intersection lies something really amazing. And that's the work you created. You're thinking about outcomes. How can we improve this? How can we make this more efficient? So, okay, you started this field. What did you take any particular training that helped you specifically? And then what was your journey like implementing that training in your practice?
Sure. So going back to 2022, initially I got certified as a health and well-being coach through a program called Well Coaches up in Boston. My wife had done that previously. I knew it was a really good program. It was 6 months long. And that's where I really learned coaching skills, right? And there's a lot of overlap in what a coach brings to a coach-client relationship that overlap with what a therapist brings to, a therapist-client relationship in terms of deeper listening, lots of reflections, lots of inquiry, open-ended inquiry to understand the interests, the goals, of individuals, but then ultimately helping them to really think about moving forward, right? How do you move forward to implement and to achieve some of these goals that you want? So that was wonderful foundational training. And then in 2024, I did another certification to become a certified divorce coach. And then, like I mentioned, just in February of this year, I went through a 40-hour training to become a trained mediator. In between, I also got trained in collaborative divorce, which we don't need to go into that right now, but that's also a more amicable route for some people who do want attorney representation. So I've cobbled together some of these professional certifications on top of my own experience with therapy and a lot of stuff that I've studied on my own, which includes attachment styles. A lot of conflict, is a result of people not understanding their attachment styles and what happens, when two attachment styles meet in a relationship. A lot of work around understanding nervous system regulation. When we think about conflict and we think about divorce, oftentimes people are reactive. And so they're not centered, they're not grounded, they're not making decisions or having responses that are leading to the best long-term outcomes. It's oftentimes coming from a place of pain or immaturity or fear or anger. So, the work in understanding nervous system regulation has been huge because in my coaching conversations, they always start with emotional de-escalation. We need to make sure that people's prefrontal cortex is available to talk through the legal issues and the financial issues and the custody issues, and to ensure that their brain is capable of thinking medium and long term about what their needs and their family's needs are. These are some of the reasons why so many people have a bad experience with divorce is they're, emotionally overwhelmed for much of that process, just reacting usually from a place of anger or fear, which is not where you want to be when you're making decisions that are going to impact you and your family for the rest of your life.
Yeah, yeah, wow. And it sounds like you really do have extensive training so that you can be suited to help a wide range of people. Yeah, that's awesome. James, if somebody partners with you and they show up to your practice, what does like the first session look like with you?
Yeah. So I do 30-minute free consults with anyone who's interested in learning more about coaching or mediation. And look, I always acknowledge that if someone's reaching out to talk to me, that things have probably been pretty challenging, in their life leading up to this point in this decision to reach out and to have a conversation with the divorce coach. But then I let them know that, most people are looking for one of three things in terms of support. They're either wanting to understand something better. Maybe there's something about the divorce process that feels scary because it's unknown. And so we could do some education. Or the second thing is that sometimes people have a conversation that they know they need to have, but for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable having it yet, right? And sometimes that's, how do I tell my spouse that I want a divorce or that I've reached the point where divorce feels like a very real possibility? And then the third thing is a decision that they might be sitting on that they feel like they need to make, but they're not entirely sure how to make it. So in those first 30 minutes, usually I present that. I ask people, give me a 3 to 5 minute summary of what has kind of happened in your life in the last month. And then that just shapes the remaining 20 minutes where we dig right into some coaching and try to create some clarity around where they might go from here. Many people start to feel scared when it feels like there's only one path forward. And I like to tell people that there's always multiple paths forward. You just can't see what they are right now. And so if I can open up that door, and oftentimes when people haven't fully committed to divorce, like there are other options around counseling, right? Maybe they've tried couples counseling, but they haven't tried discernment counseling. Maybe they've tried counseling, but they've never done an intensive, right? And so part of my job as a coach is to make sure that people are well aware of all of their available options. And then we start to talk about what those options provide. Then they feel like they've got choice. And they don't feel like they've been painted into a corner where there's only one thing that they can do to get out. And so I try to give them that sense of relief in that first call. And then if they decide that, they want to continue to have conversations like that, we can spend the last couple of minutes talking about that.
Wow, James, I love that. As you were kind of walking me through what that conversation looks like with your client during that, 20, 30-minute call. Yeah, one thing that just kind of stood out to me was structure. Like you're presenting a lot of clarity via the structure that you establish. And that is like, hey, give me the summary. These are the options that you may not even be seeing. And then as you're doing that, like you just talked about, you're opening different options, different possibility, and maybe even a little bit of hope, and I think that's such a beautiful thing to do during the consultation call. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think I tell people to remain curious about what might happen. A lot of people are feeling like they need to make a decision today that determines, the rest of their life, or at least, the next 12 to 18 months. And so I encourage people to just be curious, right? It's like, have this conversation with your spouse. And even if this is the conversation about divorce, it might knock something else loose, right? Your spouse might respond in a way that's unexpected to you, right? This might be a wake-up call that opens up new conversation. Or as you two start to go down this process and realize what it will look like to live as two single parents, single households trying to manage kids and jobs, it may create some impetus to go back and say, well, can we really work on this relationship? Maybe we should try to do this now. So again, I've seen things go so many different unexpected directions that, I may not always label it as hope with individuals, but I definitely label it as curiosity.
Yeah.
Can we just take one step and then meet again and say, well, what happened? And be open to the fact that, something other than what you assume is going to happen might actually happen.
Yeah, and I love that because as you were talking about how the individual may think that they have to make this huge decision right now, or that it's inevitable, like you said, taking that one step can just be really helpful. Just like, hey, forget everything else. What is the next immediate step that we can take? But keeping in mind that we could still be curious about all the different possibilities as far as where the road will take us, and I think that's wonderful, James. I like to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about if a therapist, for example, is working with a couple and they're experiencing this couple who's like in this boat where like they don't know if they want to stay together, or if they want to just separate, and they're like, when do you think a therapist may consider referring that couple either to you or somebody with a little bit more of this specialized training that you talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate that you asked that. So there is so much stress that gets created by uncertainty, right? And this is certainly not unique to divorce, but divorce is a major life transition. And when people in their mind or in their heart get to the point where they feel like this is a very real possibility, it's like 1,000 questions descend on them all at once. They start to worry about their kids and what this is going to do to their kids, and if they can keep their kids out of the middle. They start to think about money and what will my cash flow look like, and where will I live, and what's going to happen to the house. They think about school districts. They think about retirement. They think about all of these things, and it starts to become paralyzing because there's not answers. There's not even necessarily a framework to get to answers for many of those questions. And so I'll oftentimes tell therapists that if an individual that you're working with is starting to express concern or worry or questions about alimony, about child support, about custody and parenting schedules, or about, moving through divorce and the costs, these are things that you can talk yourself in circles around in the therapy office and not necessarily get to a place of feeling more educated or better understanding, what might be ahead. And so that's a great time to consider a referral to a divorce coach who can bring in an understanding of the divorce process, provide some education to people where necessary, and then connect them with either legal or financial or other professionals to get some additional information if they need it, right? Because obviously we can't provide legal or financial advice, but we can make warm introductions so that they can spend 30 or 60 minutes with an attorney or with a divorce financial analyst or financial planner to look at some of these things and start to think through them. So I oftentimes will describe being a divorce coach as either air traffic control or being a bridge to other support. So helping to link that client up to the information and the people that they need to start to address all of this uncertainty. And it doesn't mean that they're going to move out of the therapeutic process. It just means that they're going to get some complementary support for those specific concerns and issues, which will free up some space to stay focused on some of the other, therapeutic issues that they're there to really work through.
Oh, I love that. And it's wild because I didn't even know there was a divorce financial analyst. I forgot the
Yeah.
full, but until I met you and we were talking about this off camera yesterday. And so I just think it's really awesome that the infrastructure to support individuals going through this process is more robust, and I think it's awesome because this process, like you said, is very stressful and there are a ton of questions and the road is like so broad and mysterious, and having people that really understand this process, what the individual goes through, either through their own lived experience or just by working with individuals going through it, I think is very, very helpful. And I really appreciate that you said that that the divorce coach is not replacing the therapist. It sounds like really you are more or less like a reinforcement. They're calling in reinforcements to help with this one particular issue where you can kind of take that off the plate so that the client can really focus on other therapeutic goals. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole, swath of professionals out there that can be very helpful to an individual who's either considering or experiencing divorce. Many people, because they're overwhelmed, want to keep it simple in terms of who they're working with, right? And this is one of the reasons why people may go to an attorney, is an attorney oftentimes can advise on the legal process, is willing to advise on, the financial process. And it can feel simpler working with one person rather than working with multiple other individuals. The challenge is that you end up learning about divorce through the attorney's lens and through a very legal lens. And for most people, especially parents, there are other ways of moving through divorce that are less legal, that maintain a lot more creativity and flexibility for how they decide on the terms of their divorce. And so a divorce coach is a way of bridging people out of the therapy office into some of these other professionals. Not only is there a divorce financial analyst, which is a financial planner or a CPA that specifically understands finances in the context of divorce, there are what are called CDLPs, certified divorce lending professionals. So these are mortgage brokers who have gotten additional training on divorce, can help people to think creatively about assuming a mortgage versus refinancing, which is a huge consideration for a lot of people. Is I may want to keep the house, but if I have to refinance and it doubles my rate, then I can't afford to keep it. So there's creative options to either get equity out of a house for a buyout or for assuming that mortgage, options that many people are just unaware of, and so they miss those opportunities because they're not having the right conversations. Different types of attorneys, obviously there's collaborative attorneys, traditional attorneys, attorney mediators. Part of what I do is help to simplify, inform, but then also simplify the decision making about who people might want to work with. And then I can support those individuals to work efficiently and be like, well, this is your team, but here's how to use these different team members. Because otherwise, again, it can feel very onerous and even more overwhelming to have now 3 or 4 different professionals that I might be talking to.
Yeah, James, and as you were saying that, this one word was glaring at me, and that's strategy. Like you help the client, it seems like, strategize the process, like when to involve certain stakeholders as appropriately, depending on their needs.
Right.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
awesome. James, on conversely, is there ever a time when you're working with clients that you're like, hey, maybe you need to go check out a particular therapist to focus on certain therapeutic goals that are kind of something that you may not particularly focus on?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, a fair number of my referrals come through therapists, but I also get a fair number of referrals from colleagues and friends, right? And in the latter group, these individuals may not necessarily already be working with a therapist. But, like you and I mentioned the other day, I find that many people are at the doorstep of divorce because they may feel like they had tried therapy and it didn't work. And now it feels like there's no other options, right? This is the only kind of remaining option for them in this relationship. And yet I find that oftentimes people haven't made full use of what's available through, therapeutic partnerships. So some people have done couples therapy, but it was for a very short period of time. Or maybe people have tried Gottman therapy, but they haven't ever really explored what EFT couples work might look like for them. Or some individuals, there's been an affair or betrayal in that particular relationship, and they've done a month or 2 months of couples therapy to work through the issue, and they feel like therapy is just not going to get them there. I'm never going to be able to trust again. This just isn't going to work. I think we're going to need a divorce. And as I have learned more about the therapeutic, support community, I've started to realize that there are many people that have unique certifications. So one of those is the Certified Partner Trauma Therapy certification, which specifically looks at betrayal as a trauma and lays out a process and structure for working through that in the context of a relationship. So in the same way that I'm informing individuals about different professionals that they might work with on the divorce side, I also spend a lot of time talking to them about the other options within therapy that they might not have investigated, whether that's discernment counseling, a different type of couples counseling. Like I mentioned earlier, the benefits of an intensive versus just trickle, therapy every week or 2 weeks, or like a CPTT trained therapist, right? I want people, again, to be aware of their options. They can choose whether to invest and to engage the time and energy if they want to. But again, I don't want them to sail past some of these options simply not knowing.
Yeah, I love that because you're so right. And that is that it can be tough for a lot of people to find a therapist in the first place. And especially if they don't know anything about the modalities. I mean, there's like hundreds of modalities out there, right? CBT,
Right.
DBT, Gottman, like you said, the list is endless seemingly. And so it's not hard to imagine a couple who's navigating this topic that can be so heavy and challenging. And then they're trying to find a therapist that they connect with. And then once they connect with the therapist, making sure that that therapist is being effective with this couple and that therapy is working for them. And so, yeah, a lot of things to navigate. So I really appreciate, again, you taking a really nuanced approach with your clients and making sure that they're exploring therapy and or the divorce process appropriately and effectively. That's really cool, James. In your experience, what has been the feedback from the clients that have worked with you in the past about the services that you provide?
I mean, tremendously valuable is generally the feedback, is just to have a thought partner who doesn't have a horse in the race, right? Like, this is one of the challenges of talking to friends and family, is like they're in your corner, but they're so in your corner that sometimes it's not the neutral feedback that you're really looking for. So I've heard people describe working with me as having a thought partner or the little voice in my head. And they know that they can kind of bundle up the concerns of the week, because we typically meet on a weekly basis. And then when we sit down, we'll just unpack those. And again, I'm equipping people with an understanding of what their options are, what they may want to consider. And so they feel very empowered in this process. They're not leaning on me to tell them what they should do next, but they can come to me knowing that they will then be educated on 2, 3, 4 options of how to move forward. They can kind of slot it in with what direction they most want to go. And then they feel very empowered and educated to move forward. And so just bolstering people and making sure that they're able to exercise, self-efficacy and self-determination, I think people really appreciate that. That feels really good. And it's not something that they get from a lot of other divorce professionals, where it's more, I'm the expert, here's how things are, here's what I think you should do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. James, some professionals are very straightforward, very direct, very driven to achieve the goals. Others are a little more laid back and they kind of let the client lead. Some people involve humor, some do a little bit of self-disclosure, some don't. They keep it very professional. How would you describe like your personality, so to speak, in your work with clients?
I try to be very present. Right. I really, and I think, most therapists have worked through this too, but really trying to keep anything that I think that a client should do just on the back burner and just continue to stay very present with them. I do a lot of listening for unmet needs, a lot of listening for the emotions that they're carrying around. And so I really want people to feel seen, heard, and understood. and for us to really get down to the things that they're most wanting, whether it's in relationship or out of relationship. And then once we've got a good understanding of that and we've built some rapport, then I can really start to bring in a lot of the structure. I'm an analytical chemist, again, this background in quality assurance, quality control. I like to bring the structure, but part of what I've learned in these last 4 years is how to really connect with people, and to build that relationship and to get grounded in what matters most to them, and then to empower them with that structure to move in the direction that they want to go. Earlier on in my career, I was kind of, hard driving. I think I know best. Here's what we're going to do. And that simply doesn't work, in coaching, number one, but in this divorce space too, because, everyone's got their own dream for how things play out for them, right? They've got their own interests. They've got their own values. I can't pretend to know what those are, but I can explore those with them. So, even the vibe that's here in this interview is generally how I show up in a coaching call.
Yeah, James, I appreciate you shedding some light on your approach and your style, so to speak, in your work, because as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how that is one of the biggest things they teach us in graduate school to be therapists, is just to be present, be in the moment with your clients, just listen and be empathic, and that can go a long way. If you do nothing else right, get that thing right and just listen and be present. And that by itself can be super powerful to meaningful change. So I really appreciate that. It sounds like that's really like the cornerstone or the bedrock of your approach with your clients. That's really good.
Yeah.
James, I wanted to ask about progress. Let's say somebody partners with you, they do the initial call, they start showing up to do the sessions or the work. What does progress look like?
So there are 3 gates that I really focus on with coaching. And those gates are, number 1, should I stay or should I go? So helping people, if they haven't already made this decision, get to a decision about whether they want to stay in this marriage and work on it, or whether they're ready to leave. And I've got, a framework for how to work people through that. The second gate is really about how to tell your spouse that you want a divorce. And that's a really important conversation that can very easily go sideways. And, people don't want to be mean. They don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. And yet what's most needed is clarity. So there's oftentimes a lot of work that we need to do there, preparing for that conversation. It's how to have it. It's when to have it. And again, inviting in options. Some people are concerned that when I tell my spouse, they're going to argue with me or they're going to rebut the things that I'm saying. And so simple recommendations like, well, have you considered writing a letter and asking your partner if you can simply have 2 minutes to read through this without interruption, so that you've got the space to complete your thoughts and to not be interrupted, right? Or potentially using discernment counseling as a way of bringing all of these things to the surface and having the safety of a therapeutic container and a therapist in the room, someone helping you to really communicate the things that you want to communicate, again, giving them options. And then the third part that I focus on is really getting 2 individuals on the same page about how they want to proceed through the divorce process. There's typically so much conflict, that leads up to this point, that oftentimes some work is needed to find, despite all of the differences, where do you 2 still have shared interests? Sometimes it's around not spending tens of thousands of dollars on divorce. Sometimes it's around protecting the kids. Sometimes it's around privacy. Sometimes it's around getting through this process without it taking 12 to 18 months to do. So, finding some of these opportunities to come together around shared goals and to really sit on the same side of the table looking forward at how to move through divorce. If I can get people through those 3 steps, that's what progress looks like in coaching. And then usually before we wrap up, I like to try to make sure that that client has been connected to the next person who's going to continue to serve them in this process. Whether that's an attorney that they feel good about, whether that's a mediator that they feel good about, whether that's an online service like Hello Divorce that can help to facilitate the administrative parts of getting divorced. I like to make sure that there's a handoff to whatever the next conveyor belt is that will move them forward. And I'm not upfront about that, right? That's usually where I feel good falling into the background, is when I know that you've clarified what you want and you've gotten connected with the right people to help you to get there.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible, James. If there's somebody that's watching this episode and they're liking your style, they're liking how you present yourself and everything that you've said so far, and they want to reach out, but maybe they're reluctant to because they've never worked with a therapist or even a divorce coach, or anybody that does your line of work, and they're just kind of nervous about it, what would you want them to hear?
What would I want them to hear? That it's just a phone call, right? Many people, especially I've seen this as a divorce coach, it can feel like having a conversation with me feels like you're making some sort of a decision or some sort of a commitment in the direction of divorce. And, I can't simply tell you to feel differently about it, but I can just reiterate that this is merely a conversation, and that spending 30 minutes on the phone doesn't mean that you have committed yourself to anything else. In short, what you're doing is just having a conversation with someone who can bring you more information and bring you maybe an alternative way of thinking through the challenges that you're holding on to right now, so that what you do decide to do becomes more clear. So there's never any sort of a hard sell, on these calls. It's really a check for fit. It's a opportunity to give you a taste of coaching, because many people have still never worked with a coach before. So it's not always clear what a coaching conversation feels like. It's an opportunity to do those things. So I guess, in a nutshell, it would be, try not to put too much weight on reaching out. You're not committing to anything. You're just gathering more information.
Yeah, thank you for that, James. And I, if I remember correctly, you do offer those consultation calls for free. Is that? Got it. Okay.
Free 30-minute call. People can book that through my website. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So, if somebody's nervous to reach out, I mean, they really have nothing to lose, except maybe just a few minutes of their time to see if they're a good fit. Yeah, that's awesome. James, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and ask about your practice. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's on the horizon? Are you maybe going to roll out any coaching programs for other therapists, maybe an online course? What do you any resources that you have to share to the world out there?
Yeah, there's two things I'll mention. So we just talked about what progress looks like in divorce coaching, and that's really where I focus my coaching work. I don't do, like, there's other coaches that focus on preparing you to go to court. There's other coaches that focus on, the back end of divorce and what comes next. My focus, again, is really on those early stages of contemplation and then just getting started with the process. So the two new things, one of them is something I'm pretty excited about, which is a free online community called Amicable Divorce School. And I realized that, in working with clients this last year, that there were a lot of things I wanted my clients to know just about divorce generally that didn't really fit into a one-on-one coaching call. Like, I wouldn't want to pull up PowerPoint slides and spend half or all of a coaching call just educating you and taking you through information. And so I started organizing all of this into a school community. And as I did that, I was like, well, this will be very helpful for my clients, but this will also be very helpful for anyone who I'm not working with. So if someone just chooses not to work with a coach or can't afford to work with a coach, it's an opportunity for them to learn a heck of a lot about divorce and then how to keep divorce amicable. So that's a free online community that I'm continuing to work on and to improve. I've started to do interviews with other professionals like the divorce financial analysts. I've got 2 interviews with co-parenting specialists, which are really, really important. As I've learned about the work that they do helping individuals to co-parent, it's really profound work that I encourage people to look into when the time is right. And then the second thing I mentioned, which is mediation. So I can't coach and then mediate for the same individual, because I lose my neutrality, in the same way that you can't do therapy for an individual and then do couples therapy for them plus their spouse. But for individuals who are on the same page with how they want to move through divorce, again, here in the state of North Carolina, if they want to work with a mediator, and I'll add, if they want to work with a mediator without attorneys present, which many people don't know is an option, then that is something that I'm gearing up and prepared to do for them as well. Traditional mediation is done as like a last stop before going to court. And the courts oftentimes require that individuals mediate, but you've got one spouse and their attorney sitting in one room, another spouse and their attorney sitting in another room, and for 4 to 8 to 10 hours, you've got a mediator going back and forth with offers and counteroffers. And so, it does save you from going to court, but it's still not that collaborative. There's a growing trend for what's called pro se mediation, which is 2 individuals without attorneys who want to simply sit down at one table with a mediator and talk through custody and talk through parenting schedules and talk through what they're going to do with all of their assets and debts. And so there's only a few individuals doing this work in Charlotte and even within the state. But around the country, this is more and more what people are wanting because they're allowed to partner. And you're able to have one conversation and you're able to really focus on what works best for the two of you rather than what the laws and legal precedents say should happen, in your situation. So those are the two things that I'm really excited about that I'm going to continue to focus on here in 2026.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible, James. If somebody wants to reach out, partner with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, so I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you search James Traub, you'll find me there. I'm posting stuff almost every day. My website is bestpossibledivorce.com. It's an opportunity to learn more about coaching and mediation, and that's where people can schedule the free 30-minute call with me. And then if you search for Amicable Divorce School, you'll find the page within the school communities for the community that I mentioned earlier.
Wow, James, thank you so much for being on the show today. Lots of great information. And I still have more that I want to explore with you, but maybe we can have a show in the future and kind of do it again. What are your thoughts on that?
That would be wonderful, Rich. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I think, more people would benefit from knowing about divorce coaching. It's, again, another opportunity that sails by and usually gets missed because no one mentions it. So you being willing to do this interview and help to get the word out there, I really appreciate.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thanks again for coming on, James. And for everybody else out there tuning in, thank you for signing on. And until the next one, signing out. Bye.
Bye.